Hello, everyone. I hope we're all doing well. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you my capstone project, which is entitled Phrase Found Vowel Devoicing in French. So, a little bit of background information on my topic. Phrase found vowel devoicing is a very recent development in terms of French phonology. It was first ever mentioned in the 1960s, but it was never described until 1989 by Hungarian linguist Ivan Folnaj. In his publication, he puts forth a theory that I, E, U, and E systematically take on ich laut from German, becoming ich, ich, and euch in phrase final position. He also says that U systematically takes on ach laut from German, becoming uch in phrase final position. In 1999, Fajal and Voici further the conversation, and they say that phrase final vowels are lengthened because they are very prosodically prominent. However, this is refuted by Maria Candea in 2012, who says, no, they are not lengthened, they are shortened. Then a fricative is added, and the fricative is always longer than the vowel that it follows. And that is evidence of there being an increase in prosodic weight and then a parasitic coda, which gets formed. Meanwhile, in 2003, Anglophone linguist Caroline Smith, she says, well, if phrase found vowel devoicing is happening on the sentence level, then we should expect that the type of sentence, the type of phrase, or the intonation pattern, or other prosodic features will be affecting whether or not if phrase found vowel devoicing will be occurring. So for my hypothesis A, I'm essentially putting what Folnaj says to the test. I think that I, E, and U will become ich, ich, but that the fricatives following phrase found devoiced and u are produced farther front in the mouth. I represent this as caret c to d to mean a sound that's similar to sh, but which is produced farther front in the mouth as sh or and Folnaj's theory would expect a sound c to d caret, meaning a sound that is similar to sh, which is produced farther back in the mouth as ch. Then I wanted to test what phonological environments does phrase found vowel devoicing occur in, and what variables could there be. And then that led me to my second hypothesis, which is that phrase found vowel devoicing is characteristic of a formal register, and that it would happen most frequently in academia or in politics. And for this, I looked at speech data collected from 24 native speakers of French, 12 male and 12 female. And then I isolated their speech and I put it into Pratt and I analyzed it on various things that I don't really have time to explain. So for my first hypothesis, I do end up agreeing that I and U become ich, ich, ich. And as we can see here, here is an example of the ich laut from German. Ich, ich, ich. Notice these formant listings and the contour here. It's very dark at the beginning and then it's very light at the bottom. And then here we have taxi, déclaré, and tenu.
Taxi, taxi, déclaré, déclaré.
Tenu, tenu.
So as we can see here, it has very similar formant values and it has a very similar contour here, very dark at the top, very light at the bottom. The sh is right there and the sh is right there. This one is slightly different. It doesn't have the exact same look on the spectrogram as we would expect, and its formants are slightly different, and there's a slight increase here. This is the one piece of data from all of my data set that is kind of an oddball, and I'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. So after concluding that I and U become ich, ich, ich for various reasons that I don't have time to explain, after that, my findings were a little bit inconclusive because of the constraints of my tools. Just looking at the spectrograms and the formant values alone doesn't give you a full picture of how certain sounds are being produced or articulated. And then I didn't anticipate how similar some of these sounds would look on the spectrograms. Luckily though, we have our ears, we can hear subtle differences, and I have other knowledge that I can use to help guide us in our journey. So moving on to devoiced U, I know that there are various L2 learners of French who I've encountered who have confused the phrase final devoiced U as oof, thinking that it is the labiodental fricative f. So since I know that there's this relationship between the two where they're similar enough to be confused from one another, I thought maybe there's a relationship between those two sounds, maybe they're related, and that could help me pinpoint what sound this actually is. So I've put them side by side here. So they're produced by the same speaker, by the way. So I'll let you listen to them now.
Beaucoup. Beaucoup. De ouf. De ouf.
So beaucoup, and then de ouf, de ouf. I know that this is not labiodental, but I figured that since these come up very similarly on the spectrogram here, that's the and this is the f, and these are their formant values, again, very similar. I did some research and I was looking into what sounds could be related to the f sound, and I ended up coming across a symbol here, the voiceless bilabial non-sibilant fricative h. So I've compared the h to the h to the h that phonage suggests happens. So I'll let you listen to them now.
C'est beaucoup, c'est beaucoup.
Fa.
F.
Machen.
Machen.
So as you can tell here, it does not sound the same, it does not look the same, it has different formant values, and it does not look at all the same on the spectrogram, although all of these kind of look like very dark blobs. Again, the constraints of Pratt. But we know that this is not the case here. This is not what's going on. But after analyzing this in several of the data, it seems to me that this really is the best symbol. And I thought that this was going to be applicable to the devoiced as well. But I ended up not thinking that that is in fact the case. So here's devoiced
Deux, deux, deux.
versus
C'est beaucoup, c'est beaucoup.
beaucoup. So these have slightly different formant values, which can be expected, but also they look quite different on the spectrogram. This one has a very distinct line right down the middle, which does not exist in any of these other examples. So I was trying to think, and I was like, well, what else could this be? It's obviously not the h, and I don't think it's matching up with f. So I thought maybe it was an approximative form of sh or something related to that. But, and they do sound similar.
Deux, deux.
Dish and sh. They sound similar, but the place of articulation is different. And we can see that these show up way different on the spectrogram, and they have completely different formant values. So I ended up kind of deciding that maybe this is the best way to describe this sound, because it is very similar to sh, but just pronounced farther front in the mouth as sh. But what I noticed with both of these sounds, sh and is that they're both labialized. After looking at various speakers producing these sounds, I can see that the lips are always pursed during the production of those fricatives, and this is left over from the articulation of the values that the vowels that precede them. So basically in the articulation, the lips become pursed and they constrict the airflow, causing a raise in pitch, and that's what forms this these fricatives. So I did some research and I found that there is in fact a labialized form of this symbol here, which is known as the voiceless labialized bilabial non-sibilant fricative h. The main difference is that in the non-labialized version, the lips are sort of stacked flat together during the articulation, whereas what we see in French and also in the articulation of this symbol, we have a pursed lip situation. So here's the sound sample.
Beaucoup, beaucoup. Beaucoup, beaucoup.
Beaucoup and beaucoup. So same word produced by different people, but you can hear that it sounds the same. And during that sound, it's like the f sound, but the lips are pursed, it's labialized, so beaucoup, beaucoup. And since I've decided that this really, because I don't have x-rays, I cannot see where the exact place of articulation is, I really had to decide that this maybe is the best way to describe this sound. I've added a little W superscript to show that it is also being labialized, because we can see it in all of the speakers, they have these pursed lips, dush, ush, and that really helps shape the articulation of that fricative. So when it came to the phonological environments, I found that phonological rule notation did not lend itself to the depiction of how, when, or why phrasal vowel devoicing was occurring, which I think nods to the complexity and the nuance of this phonological feature. Speaking of its nuance, one of the first conditioning variables that I found was gender. 9 out of 12 females produced phrasal vowel devoicing, but only one out of the 12 males that I found produced any phrasal vowel devoicing, and he was the president of the country, and he only produced the phrasal vowel devoicing during presidential decrees to the country, so a very formal setting. Then I found that E was the most commonly produced devoiced vowel among women, while U was the most commonly devoiced vowel among men. So out of all of the instances of phrase final vowel devoicing with women, 58% of all those instances were ish, whereas 37.5% of all of the instances of phrase final vowel devoicing among men were ush. That's very interesting. I'm not really sure why that is. But then thirdly, I found that phrase final vowel devoiced fricatives were, if they were followed by a voiceless phone, there's a pause of at least 1/5 of a second that is required. Whereas on the other hand, the phrase final vowel devoiced fricatives that are followed by a voiced phone never had a pause, and that happens in perfect complementary distribution here. We can also see that, like what Maria Candea suggests, all of the fricatives are longer than the vowels that precede them, and in my data, they are on average 2.5 times longer than the vowels that they follow. And I also found that the length of the phrase leading up to the phrase final vowel devoicing had no effect on whether or not if it would occur. So in my hypothesis here, I had predicted that phrase final vowel devoicing would be most likely to occur in formal settings, specifically politics or academia. Was this true? Well, yes and no. Surprisingly, phrase final vowel devoicing happened in a very wide variety of genres, even comedy, depending on the level of satire or sarcasm. So it seemed to occur less frequently in political and academic settings. And there were two main reasons for this. One, speakers were very impassioned or they were talking very quickly, so they did not allow for the pause that's required in certain phonological environments for the phrase final vowel devoicing to occur. And two, oftentimes they were evoking a certain playfulness or informality, lowering themselves to their audience's level to avoid condescendence, which is important. When I was talking with native speakers about what do they think about phrase final vowel devoicing, a lot of them remarked that it sounds very condescending. So interestingly, videos relating to cosmetic makeup tutorials and product reviews had the highest concentration of instances of phrase final vowel devoicing in them. After analyzing all of the data and looking at all of the nuances of when it does occur and when it doesn't and where it could have but did not, the best rule that I could come up with was that phrase final vowel devoicing was most likely to occur when the speaker had more expertise on a subject than their audience, and they were in the act of explaining that information to them. With that being said, here's an example of where it does and does not happen. The first example is from a makeup tutorial from Vogue Paris, and the second is from a stand-up comment.
Décupler l'hydratation de mes produits.
De mes produits.
Mais pendant très longtemps, moi j'ai eu un portrait de Simone de Beauvoir sur ma table de chevet, quand même à côté de mon lit.
Okay, so as we can see here, this is the same phonological environment, but it happens, the phrase final vowel devoicing happens in one instance and it does not happen in the other. And yes, they have different contexts. One is more playful, one is more, instructional, or, there's like an element of apprenticeship, right? But when I put these side by side, I noticed, well, the ri and rish has a falling pitch in the vowel, whereas here there's a drastic rise in pitch. So then I noticed this when I put it into my presentation. So I went back and I started looking through the data, and I found that it is statistically significant that through all of the data that I've looked at so far, whenever the phrase final vowel devoicing does occur, there is a fall in pitch, whereas when it could have occurred but did not, there is a drastic rise in pitch. So going back to this oddball before with tenue.
Tenue.
Oh, play again.
Tenue.
There we go. It has a very slight increase in pitch, but it's not drastic enough to eliminate the phrase final vowel devoicing from occurring. And I think maybe this is why it shows up differently on the spectrogram from these other two, and has these lower, this like anomalous, incongruence with its form and values and the way that it looks on the spectrogram. Because even with Emmanuel Macron, other instances of him saying tenue or ému or entendu, etc., it lines up perfectly with the other fricative. And so anyways, what I ended up concluding is that perhaps there is a relationship between the fall in tone and the increase in prosodic weight, which then leads to the phrase final vowel devoicing, fricative, or whereas the drastic rise in pitch maybe is associated with alleviating that prosodic weight, which then eliminates the need for the fricative. So here's my suggestions for future research, which I don't have time to explain, and some summaries of my findings. And yes, thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a very good day, and leave your comments wherever you can. Bye.